Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session, Myths and Barriers Related to Kidney Transplantation, How We Can Overcome Them. My name is Jerome Bailey, as I've introduced myself a couple of times today, actually, and I'm with the ESRD NCC team. A kidney transplant has been shown to help people with kidney failure feel better and live longer lives. Unfortunately, many myths persist about the kidney transplant process, including when you should get it, how much the transplant costs, and who's eligible. We've invited a few transplant recipients to share their experience and address some of the most common myths and explain how kidney transplant has improved their quality of life. Next slide. So we have with us Della Major, who's a legacy SME from Q-Source ESRD Network 10. On the panel is Mike Bronson, also from Q-Source, but ESRD Network 12, and John Baton, an NPFE-LAN SME with Quality Insights Renal Network 5. So next slide. I want to introduce first the moderator of today's session, Della Major. Della is the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization called LIVE, which stands for Living Your Life Victorious and Empowered. She was diagnosed with kidney failure in 2011. Della keeps very busy supporting fellow kidney patients. She's a certified kidney health coach for the American Kidney Fund, a facility peer representative for Renal Network 10, a member of the Patient Advisory Council, a subject matter expert for the National Coordinating Center, Patient and Family Engagement Learning and Action Network, and she volunteers with several other organizations. In 2017, Della received the Robert Felto Memorial Award from the Renal Network, which recognizes patients who are champions for dialysis and transplant patients, and a guiding force for patient-centered activities. So, welcome, Della.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you for such a wonderful rendition of my accolades, but then at the same time, what can I say? NCC is excellent. Well, I want to say welcome. I am really so excited and pleased to be part of this discussion about the myths and barriers related to kidney transplantation and how we can overcome them. We know there's a lot of myths that's out here about kidney transplantation, and a lot of times people begin to say to themselves, can I even qualify? What's the purpose? What's the difference? And so we're hoping today with the panelists that we have to dispel some of these myths and some of the barriers that can hinder us to stop us from being qualified as a transplant recipient. But with that today, with that being said, today we do have two panelists who's going to be sharing their own personal journey to kidney transplantation, including myself when an opportunity arises. We have time at the end of the on this agenda. We have time, of course, all of the questions that you might have or any questions you might want to ask the panel. We will have basically hold that to the end, and then we'll be able to share and then engage a little bit further. With that being said, I want to introduce the panelists. John Baton is from Washington, D.C. John is a communications and events manager. He was diagnosed with kidney failure in 2016 and received a kidney transplant in February 2019. He has experience with in-center hemodialysis, in-center nocturnal hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis. John enjoys cookout, dancing, traveling, horseback riding, exploring new foods, and graphic design. All of that I really like. Now, our second panelist, which is Mike Bronson. Mike lives in, oh gosh, I hope I can pronounce it correctly. Tungazi, I think it is, Kansas. You correct me, Mike, once you get to your turn.
Tonganoxie.
Tonganoxie, thank you. Kansas, where he served as a pastor. He has been married to his wife, Tara, for over 35 years. He was diagnosed with kidney disease in 1985, went to ESRD in 2009, and received an unrelated living donor transplant. He is currently the PAC chair for the ESRD Network 12. I want to welcome our panelists today and just say I'm so excited to hear what we are going to be able to share. With that being said, I want to go forth and talk about, and let us just jump right on in. I want to talk about some of these myths and barriers and just really ask a few questions, if you will. I'm not going to leave this both for you, Mike, or even for you, John. It doesn't matter who starts, but as a matter of fact, no, I will start with you, Mike. Let's ask this question for you. What was the hardest part of your transplant experience?
Well, the hardest part, that's a little complicated, and I'll try to make it short. I started at a transplant center, and they obviously had some internal administrative problems. For example, I had a living donor that took over a year just to work that person up. Took over a year to work myself up. And so I didn't realize that you can be listed at different transplant centers. And that's something those of you watching may be interested to know. When I learned that I could go to another transplant center, we went and it was done very quickly. So the barrier was that I was supposed to be transplanted preemptively. And because of those problems, it was, it was almost a 2-year process before from end-stage renal disease to transplantation. So that was by far my biggest barrier, Della.
Okay. John, are you with me?
Della, can you hear me?
There you go. I can hear you now. I would like to ask you the same question. What was the hardest part of your transplant experience?
I would say the hardest part of my transplant experience was actually just the waiting, really, just not knowing exactly when I was going to get that call. It actually felt to a certain degree that, life was on hold for a little while as I was waiting for that call. I also just want to take a moment to apologize. I'm having some video issues, so I may just be able to participate audio only. I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's all you want to share? Okay. With that being said, both of you guys hit on some very key points as relates to the transplantation process. Definitely, Mike, when you said you didn't know at that time you can be listed at multiple locations and multiple sites for the transplantation, that was something really, really key that we needed to share with the audience, that just not one location, one place got to be the be all, the do all. You can go and get listed, and I know that was to be the same case for myself. But one of the things we want to take into consideration is if you do go to a different state or whatever, make sure you have all of your ducks in a row, because of course, once you get transplanted, you have to be in that area and go back there. So that's definitely something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that waiting process, John, is definitely nerve-wracking, not knowing when to get the call, if you leave from the phone or what. So I truly understand that experience, because that's the same emotions that I had. With that being said, I want to go to a second question that I have for you, Mike. What was the best part then of your transplant experience?
Well, I was blessed to have an unrelated living donor. I mean, how do you say thank you to someone who's given you a kidney? It's been almost 11 years ago, and I sent her a gift card for Christmas about 3 years ago, and she called me and said, you don't have to keep doing that. So, yeah, that was by far the best, and it's actually an extra incentive to be a good steward of your body and be a good steward of your kidneys. So, thank you for that.
And that is so important, the fact that you was able to have a contact with your kidney donor, and the fact that you still is acknowledging that gift, honoring that gift. And that's really, really highly important. And I really applaud you for that. Now, for you, John, I have a question for you. What was the surgery recovery like for you?
Hey, Della, this is Matt. It looks like John's having some audio issues. We're trying to get reconnected.
Okay. Well, let me ask the same question of for you, Mike, what was the surgery recovery like for you?
It was harder than I thought it was going to be.
Hmm.
They cut through your abdominal muscles, so it took me 7 weeks to get back to work, but it took me quite a bit of time to get back on my feet and get back to normal. And then every individual, as you know, has different issues that they have to face. I ended up with a stomach flu and being immunosuppressed. You can't get rid of that, so it took 4 months for that to be finished. So that was by far the hardest part. Yet I know some people who've had a transplant and they're back up and on their feet in a few weeks and doing pretty good.
You wouldn't know what's so interesting about what you're sharing currently right now. It took my daughters to tell me this, but unbeknownst to me, I had a hernia that was hiding under my
Oh,
umbilical area. And so when they went in to do the transplantation, it wind up being to the point they had to first remove the hernia and then go through the process of doing the transplantation. I didn't even know that. It probably made sense. That's the reason why I wasn't able to lose that belly fat. But at the same time, yeah, at the same time, it did extend the length of time of my surgery. And what I can say is the aftermath of the surgery, it was a little bit unbearable, obviously, for me, because they said my children told me that I was even crying out for my mother, trying to have her to come to help me through the pain. And, when
well,
you're on the station, who's to say,
oh
so.
yeah. So let me just add this for those of you watching that may think, man, this sounds scary. I remember the first couple of days they said, you get up, you're walking. And I said, no, I'm not. And they said, oh, yes, you are. And I mean, I'm staggering along on a walker and I think I'm never going to recover from this. Well, I walk 3-4 miles a day and I exercise all the time and you will recover from it. It takes time and patience is not my virtue. And I think that's true with a lot of people, but it's how you eat an elephant is the old saying, and it's one bite at a time. So
I totally
it can be
agree with
done.
you. I think we got John back. So, John, do I have you?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about
No
that.
problem. I want to ask you this question. So, what
Okay.
was surgery recovery like for you?
Actually, my surgery recovery was actually pretty quick. I remember, well, we all remember waking up and that unique feeling of, having to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. But they actually came in and had me up walking, I think probably about 2 hours after I woke up post-op.
Yep.
Um, and, they walked me like a little bit, like basically around the first few steps around the corner there and then back. And then my recovery process was actually pretty quick as well because I had made the conscious decision that I was going to take 3 months off, recover my strength and so forth. But then after less than a month, I found myself participating in my network's annual meeting. And then 2 weeks after that, actually hired for a new position. So I actually got up and back up and running very
Wow.
quickly. So,
Wow.
uh, um, and I'm not quite sure why that was. I mean, it just kind of happened that way. But it could have been fueled by excitement. I was just excited about the transplant. I was excited about not having to do dialysis again. I felt like that I was rejoining a lot of corners of my life that I had sort of excluded for a while. And
Mhm.
so I think all of that kind of came together and said, okay, it's time for me to get back out there. And boy, did I get back out there. So,
Really so exciting to hear. I'm loving both of your testimonies and your stories. It's just really so inspiring. And I'm quite sure the audience who's watching us is being inspired as well. This is going to lead me into the fourth question, another question that I have that's coming to my mind. What are the biggest barriers that you can say about getting on the transplant list? John, since you was talking, let me ask you that question first.
I would say, well, one of the biggest barriers was myself because I didn't know what to expect. And I was a little nervous and I was a little afraid. Thankfully, I had a nephrologist who talked to me and encouraged me along in the process. Uh, I, Also, I would say one of the barriers is the amount of information you're given about transplant. Um, I know that there was about several months in which I actually sat in the chair and in the beginning, in which I didn't even know what my treatment options were, let alone what my, the availability for me to be able to get on the transplant wait list. That actually happened for me when my attending nephrologist at that time retired, and the new nephrologist that replaced him came on board and looked at me and said, "Why are you sitting here?" And I looked at him, "What do you mean?" And through that introduction of my new nephrologist, we went peritoneal. Then we went immediately to transplant list. And a couple of years later, I found myself, being transplanted. So that was the information, getting the information, and to a degree, the encouragement as well was, I would say, one of the most significant barriers. Because once I actually started the process, it was no different than any other medical process. There are procedures, processes that you have to go through, testing, so on and so on. And I didn't find any of that to be specifically challenging. I actually expected it. And then I got on the list, and, they checked in with me. I checked in with them. And as I said earlier, the most challenging after that was just waiting. So.
Mm. Mike, what about you? What were some of the biggest barriers of getting on the transplant wait list for you?
Yeah, probably for me, it was just the unknown. It was more mental. Maybe like John said, it was myself. I didn't have a good roadmap as to exactly what would happen. So you go for a test, you come back, oh, you've got to go for this test. Oh, I didn't realize you had that test. The whole time you're getting sicker and sicker, you become uremic, and it just begins to wear you down mentally, and your mind works against you. You think, this isn't going to happen. This just isn't going to happen. I've got one more test. Am I going to pass that test? But yeah, I say, even as I'm saying it out loud here, I'd have to say ultimately it's as much mental as anything. And then, of course, Della, you know this too, and John, so do you. There's the financial aspect as well. There are
Yes.
the costs that insurance doesn't cover.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you need an administrative assistant to help you with all the paperwork, and so it's a pretty daunting task.
Yeah,
Yes.
I still do remember my first time going to Medicare or social services and having to wait for my interview, first schedule the interview, then wait for my interview, then get in and go through the entire process and the waiting. And then even after you go through that process, there's still more waiting after that,
Yep.
and additional clarification that needs to be made before you even get the insurance. And then, as you said, the secondary insurance, which is also needed, can be challenging as well.
Both of what you both are saying is so key, and it's really, really important for us to make sure that we get that specific information out. Not only is it a mental burden, it's a financial burden, but it's just the overall weight, the worry that follows the transplantation and everything. Am I going to qualify? Did I pass this one test? I got to make sure that my dental is in order. I have to make sure that, these other lab tests, and especially if you're dealing with multiple mobilities, like in my case, it was the lupus that destroyed my kidneys. And so, for 10 years, I did dialysis, and at least for 6 of those years, I was told I would never, would not, the word was never qualify for a transplant. Until court, yeah. And this came from coordinators and everything like that. That just definitely was something that just really blew my mind. And so when I think about the mental capacity of being told never, it was like no hope. So you mentioned about the encouragement, you mentioned about information, so key. I am definitely a supporter that, a well-informed patient is a healthy patient, and that information is just really not readily out there. The full package, not give me a few nuggets, but tell me everything. Let me be the one to be in controlling and in the power on that particular line. You guys, y'all dynamite. I'm really loving this.
Can I toss something
It's a question that really sort of kind of was, I see here a little bit that I want to throw this out too. With all the barriers that we had to overcome to even get a transplant, do you think it's worth it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 100% worth it.
Yeah.
I'll put it this way. I was on peritoneal dialysis. The numbers were fine, but it wasn't working for me. I vowed to keep working through until a transplant, but the week before my transplant, I couldn't even get out of bed. I was going to have
Yeah.
to switch to hemo or something. And I've been now going on for 10 and a half years. So absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Well,
go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
Well, Della, I can also speak to it from another perspective as well, and the fact that I've actually had the opportunity to do all the modalities of treatment, from
Yes.
in-center to in-center nocturnal to peritoneal to home hemodialysis to transplant. And I can sit here and 100% tell you that transplant is my most favorite of them all. Because the fact that I can walk out of this door anytime that I want to walk out of the door, at any time of the day, for any purpose, and not have to worry about scheduling a time or reserving time for me to go through the process of doing dialysis. That freedom is absolutely, yeah, definitely 100% made the worth weighted. It made the barriers worth it. It made, the journey, the whole journey worth it.
Excellent, excellent response. And that's exactly how I feel. You guys heard me say the word never when I was told that I would never, but yet still, no is just really not part of my vocabulary, and I understood the length of time that it took me finally to get there. But it was just something that motivated me, inspired me to make sure that I do whatever I can within my control to make myself a qualified candidate. That means I did research. I sat there and I looked up lupus with kidney disease, everything that I had to do. And I made sure if I had to eat certain things a certain way, I did that. If I had to take whatever medications, do that, no matter what. My goal of my purpose and focus point was get my lupus numbers down to as quiet as best as possible and then go forth. And when they told me I only needed to do one little test just to make sure there was no scarring on my liver, man, I got so excited. You just don't understand. That wasn't a barrier. That was something that I'd like. If that's the only thing I have to do. And so when I told I was approved, I actually did a jig all the way around my house, because now instead of me being told never, instead of me being told no, it was a hope. And that's what I want to encourage everybody who's listening. I don't care how many times they tell you no, you do what you have to do with a yes on your mind, with a yes to move forward. And I'm telling you, nothing will stop you. You will achieve that particular goal. And with that being said, it's going to lead me to the next question, because I know this is a concern that most of us have. We talked about all of the things that we had to put together. But one of the things I want to talk about now is that wonderful medication. So can we talk, I'm going to start off with you, Mike. Can we talk about the medications you now have to take that you have now that you have a transplant? And there's a B-side. Have you had any side effects? So let's talk about the medications now since you've been transplanted, and have you had any side effects?
Great question. Let me double back to you, though, for just a second. The fact that you had lupus and you did what was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say to anybody watching, any patient, and I say this, and I hope it doesn't sound harsh, but it's your issue. You have to take control, and you can take control.
Mm-hmm.
So you research, you do what you have to do to qualify for a transplant. Kudos to you, because lupus is a brutal disease, and kudos to you for qualifying for transplant with lupus. And so you're an example that people can do it. No flattery intended. That's an awesome thing.
Thank you.
Medication. I've been really blessed because I've had skin cancer is the big one, because you're immunosuppressed. You have to stay out of the sun. I go to the dermatologist often, but that's a small price to pay for the transplant. That's been really my only side effect. But Della, when we advocate for patients, me personally, and I've been doing this since 2015 with Network 12, the number one question that I get from people who are thinking about having a transplant is, I don't know that I can take all these pills. How do you take all these pills? Well, first of all, how many are you taking on dialysis? Add a few at the beginning. And now I take less than half of what I took 10 years ago when I started. So I just wanted to throw that in as well.
Yeah, I too started out with about 10 10 to 13 different medications after the transplant. And I don't have any other chronic illnesses with the exception of the kidney disease. So as a result, I'm now down to my primary two immunosuppressants. And the rest of the stuff I actually buy is and prednisone. Uh, those are the only three that I take that are, that I have to go to the pharmacy to get. The others are all over-the-counter medications, which just make sense to take anyhow. A multi-day Valium, D3, just very generic things like, baby aspirin, which I was taking before I had the transplant. And then the only other additional medication that I take is sometimes like a sleep aid, and that's it. So I would argue that, you may start off big, but you'll be amazed at how small it becomes as you meet certain goals, certain milestones in your post-transplant journey.
Excellent information. I know for myself, I'm still taking quite a bit because, I have to take them twice a day. Remember, I still have to take certain medications for the lupus. So that's just something for the rest of the life. And I know they said that the transplant medicines that I normally would be taking, it should also like suppress or keep the lupus quiet. But unfortunately, I've been taking 4 of those medicines well before kidney transplant, well before renal disease even came into existence in 2011 for me. So my body somewhat became accustomed to it and adjusted. So I didn't have no side effects, but the reality is it was that, and then you have the transplant for sure medication. So I take in the average, at least a couple for my cardio as well. 12 in a day, and then I take an additional 14 actually, additional 2 more. So it's 12 in a day, 14 in the evening. So that's like 26 total. But I'm quite sure it's going to eventually dwindle down as the more I go forward along that line. So I don't look at it as a negative because each one can probably cancel one out from one another. But at the same time, as far as relatable side effects, I've been pretty good. I don't throw up, not nauseated or anything like that. So it's been pretty good. So I want people to know you might start, as John said, you start off big, but as you develop and as you continue to grow, go longer with your kidney transplant, eat the healthy things, do what's required, being compliant. You're going to hear me say this word, being compliant.
Right.
That means not skipping the medicine because you don't want to take another pill. Be compliant, and then trust me, you guys will find yourself being free when you are compliant along that particular line. So I want to definitely get that out. Yes, it might seem a lot in the beginning, but trust me there. I want to take away a little bit about from these myths and whether or not you can qualify for these medications, your transplant medications, because that's a burden for some, because they're looking at, I'm taking all these pills, how I'm going to qualify, will I ever qualify? Can you say, is any of that been on you, Mike or John? John, I could start off with you. Was that ever really a concern, whether or not would you be able to financially qualify for your medications for your transplant?
Well, I knew that I qualified for my medications because thankfully the transplant institute had done all the work for me and, helped me understand that I could actually, qualify and have my medications paid for. Now, you have to understand I'm also in the unique position of being within that three-year window of time. So is it a concern for me now as I continue to move closer to that 3-year date, whether or not I'll be able to afford those medications? And given my present financial, situation, given how things are going, I can confidently say yes. But we also know that as a result of, the pandemic last year, a lot of things have been thrown up in the air, questions wise, will careers proceed? Will they not? Will there be another introduction or, will things get worse? Will it get better? So I know that has troubled me. Right now I'm doing great, But what happens in February of next year when my 3 years runs out, I may not be doing great. But I'm a little bit more confident today that, my immunosuppressant medications will be covered because of the recent passage of the Immunosuppressant Act.
Yes.
So as a result of that, I have that stability is, I have a little bit more confidence in that stability than I would normally have had, say, before December. But my medications have not proved to be financially challenging in any sense yet. And I'm very blessed to be able to sit here and say that, because I know that's not the case for everyone.
Wow, wonderful. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, yes and no. Like John, the first 3 years, you knew your immunosuppressants were going to be covered, but then I have recurrent FSGS, so the disease recurred in the transplanted kidney. So I take a lot of other meds. I take a lot of blood pressure med, which some of that's generic, but others aren't. So I have a lot of deductible out of pocket every year. And then I don't want to chase this rabbit very far, but I'm not real clear about that bill that was passed. I think, well, chase it. So yeah, it's an issue, and but we've spent an awful lot of money, and thank God, I'm grateful that he's provided that we've been able to pay our bills. Like John said, that's not the case with others, but it is a strain. So I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but it is a strain.
Okay. Well, you know what it is. I know we'll talk about it a little bit at the end as we get close. I got one more question, and I think it's going to open up anyhow for the audience. But then we'll talk about that immunosuppressant bill. It was just recently passed, and so a lot of things that went into it. A lot of organizations partner to get that bill passed, and I know I have some information around here, but we'll get to it, and we'll definitely be able to share that as well. I'm coming up to my final question before we open it up for the floor for our audience questions. What have you learned? I'm going to start off with you, Mike. What have you learned about yourself during this pandemic?
Oh, during the pandemic, loneliness is a real issue. Being immunocompromised the first 2 months, all I did was sit at home and work, and then on Sunday I would go and meet one man at the church, and we would record a video sermon, and that was it. And of course I'm married, so I had to accompany my wife, but I couldn't believe how lonely I got. And when you're lonely, your mind begins to play tricks on you. So I learned that I'm weaker than I thought, if that's that makes any sense. And then but I also learned that everybody else is in the same situation. So sometimes you think, should I reach out to someone? Yeah, do it. Do it. How's it going to go wrong?
Yes.
So I learned that probably I sit back a little bit too much.
What about you, John?
So I've experienced the normal feelings that most people have had during the pandemic, but I can't say that they've all been negative either. What the pandemic basically did for me, it actually slowed me down. I was moving at 100 miles an hour with my job. You have to understand, I do events and PR, so I'm all over the place and active all the time, especially here in my home city of the district. And so it actually made me sit back and take time to look at myself. And in looking at myself, it made me sort of reevaluate a lot of, the things that I felt were what was actually a priority for me, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to move forward. It also has helped me identify some real awesome coping mechanisms, such as, I walk every day. It's cold outside and rainy. I'll figure out a way to get my walk in today. That led to me taking pictures with my phone, which then led to me doing a lot more stuff videography and photography wise. I've retooled my entire career to, a virtual setting. So it hasn't all been negative for me. I've also said on several other occasions that what I had found with my experience on dialysis, which I have over 10 plus years on dialysis at some point in time, and then with the transplant journey itself, I actually felt to a certain degree that I've been uniquely prepared for this pandemic. And how to address emergencies, how to develop coping mechanisms and sort of, to get you through that day that may not be so good as others, and how to, uh, respond to being isolated. And so I'll say that's what the pandemic has brought to me. Now, not to say that hasn't been some negative days here and there, but I've always been of the frame of mind to look for the brighter points of things. And that's actually what's kept me going from the day that I was diagnosed with kidney disease to the transplant process to where I'm at now. I typically accept the negative, but the negative's not going to stop me. I make sure that I'm going to continue and figure out ways to move past the negative, and just the little things I find that I enjoy. The fresh air, just the fresh air I enjoy. Just being able to eat, I enjoy. Cooking, walking, so I've just been able to fill my life a little bit more. And I hope to be able to continue to do that as hopefully the pandemic ends.
Okay. Well, you know what? I want to thank you guys. This has just been such a phenomenal opportunity and time of our discussion. And I know for me during the pandemic, a lot of emotions, like you said. I love both of your responses because I felt all of those emotions, and including even after getting COVID following my first vaccine shot. And I'm still recovering from it, but I just believe that what they say, bend the curve. I believe I got a blessing because I don't bend the curve a little bit. You hear me talk before you couldn't hear me talk along that particular line. So I'm really excited about that. But you know what? Even in spite of everything that's been going on, all of the negatives, it is up to us to find that one good thing. If you focus on the mini wins, those small little victories, then everything else begin to fall in the necessary place that you can be able to get that big macro win. And that's one, if it's a word of encouragement that I can leave for anybody, especially us as transplant recipients, go for those mini wins, go for those small victories, and then watch and see everything that's going on around you is going to be so small compared to the victories that you already have. So with that being said, thank you, John. Thank you, Mike, for joining me, allowing me to be your moderator for this call today. I'm going to turn it over back to Jerome and the crew. And then I think it's time for us to maybe get some questions and answers. So Jerome.
Hey, Della, Mike, and John. Thank you, guys. Really good conversation so far, so thank you. For our audience, if you have a question for Della, Mike, or John, please put your question in the chat box and make sure you send it to all panelists so that we can see when it comes up. I did want to go back to a conversation you guys were having a little bit earlier about the pressure that you had when it came to getting everything in order for the transplant, like the finances, all of the doctor checkups. Like, how did you handle that pressure? Like, how did you cope with that during that time? Did you talk to a therapist? Did you talk to a social worker? Did you talk to your family? How did you cope with all that pressure during that time?
Well, I know if I start this off, I know for myself, it was really the real conversation with my daughters, because they're so used to me, the Miss Go, Go, Go type of person. So I had to sit down and talk to them about what my goal was going to be and what I'm hoping and expecting. And so sharing with them and receiving those words of encouragement from my children helped me to be able to deal with a lot of other small things. I did speak to the social worker. Not only my previous social worker at the transplant clinic not transplant clinic, but for the dialysis clinic that I was at, talked to her about the transplant process because I felt that I was not getting enough information from the transplant orientation and all of that. And so she's just such a wealth of knowledge. So she really helped me to map out an imagery in my mind to help me to understand that transplantation is not a cure, it's a treatment. So when I really focused in that vein, then I started to put those like little blocks and barriers together for myself, and then worked backwards moving forward. That means the easy stuff that I could tackle and get done first, that's what I worked on. And the final part, which was the financial and everything like that, I left that last because I knew that was going to take a lot of my energy. So she helped me to put things in order. So
I'll go next.
Mike or John?
I'll go next. Well, first of all, to start out, I did not have what you would call your typical family support when all this began with me. But what I did have was true friends. And over the course of that time, one particular friend and their family has actually become my new family. And they were the support system that I drew upon a lot as I was going through the whole kidney journey. And it didn't just stop there. It was also the support that I received from some awesome techs at the dialysis centers who, would stop and listen to me. Social workers, dietitians, support groups also were very key for me, dealing with the pressure, because there's nothing better than going to support group and sitting in a room of people who can relate to what it's like to get a transplant or to sit in the dialysis chair or what that experience is. And I also turned, ironically enough, to advocacy. Becoming an advocate actually, gave me a whole new family as well of people out there in the community who felt very strongly on the issues of kidney disease and kidney awareness and transplantation. So just to sum it up, you can't do it alone. It takes a team, and that's what I found. That's what I have come out on the inside of this, is that I have a team in place. I have a solid group and a solid new family on this place with the same trials and tribulations with any normal family, but I have that now, and they are essential in the support on a day-to-day basis, a weekly basis. Just being able to pick up that phone and say, hey, it's not such a good day today. And being able to talk about it is of tremendous support.
And Mike?
Yeah, and I had the typical familial support, especially from my wife. But then I'm also a pastor, so I believe in Jesus, I believe the Bible, so I just continued with the spiritual habits that I had before, and that blessed me, and that was the primary thing that got me through the entire time.
So one of the questions that came in is, how did you go about asking people to be a donor to you? Mike, does this apply to you?
Yeah, I was in a unique situation, again, being a pastor. So when I told people, I had people, just one quick anecdote, I had a guy tell me, I'm definitely going to donate a kidney to you. And I said, well, you have to be perfectly healthy. And he said, well, I am, except for my diabetes. I said, well, they're certainly not going to take you. And he was almost offended by that. But I was blessed to have some people who wanted to be a living donor. So I didn't ask anybody. I was just really blessed.
I did ask. I asked, let me rephrase. I asked, and then there were people who offered. But at the same time, knowing what health issues would prevent someone from being a donor also prevented those who offered to be a donor from doing so. I am a child of technology, love tech, love website design, and so on and so on. So I actually started asking people through designing an actual website of my own that was designed to ask people and help get the word out, and using the different social tools and so forth that were available to me to sort of help make that ask. And did get a number of replies back, but again, it always sort of came back down to the health issues that they may have had, be it BMI, high blood pressure, diabetes, an existing chronic illness, or something of that nature. But I also asked in other subtle ways as well, so that I talked about kidney disease. I talked about the situation, which always fostered additional conversations, even to this day when I'm sitting, when I'm meeting a client for the first time and we're getting in that get to know you phase, I'll figure out a way to get in there to say, yes, I received a transplant 2 years ago. And you just be amazed at how that conversation opens up and starts caring to other people, and then other people want to help. I mean, there's a lot of altruism out there, more so than what the news and what everyone will have you believe. And it just starts with you talking about it. Um, and so that's how I addressed asking for a kidney.
Well, for me,
we got a question in the chat that I would like you to answer. This person says, thank you all. For us social workers to improve and better serve, what did your social worker do well in this process, or what would you have liked to see more from your social worker?
well, you know what? First of all, she was open. She was open to listen. She listened in a way where I had a full melt breakdown in her office when I was sharing about this, because, she knew my desire to want to get free from being in a dialysis chair. So, and that's, being the oldest child, a lot of burdens is put upon you, and a lot of my emotions. I was going through depression. I didn't even know I was depressed. And so she listened, she allowed me to cry, but then she helped me to identify what was really, really going on. And the fact that she wasn't a psychiatrist, she wasn't a, psychologist or wanted to prescribe medicines and everything, but what it is, she brought a real life personal connection that let me know that she was just, I'm not a statistic to her. I wasn't just chair number 19 patient or whatever. She made me feel like I was part of a family structure, and she really honestly cared. And so that she listened, and that was something that if any patient can say, to have somebody to say, hey, you're the number one right now, you're more important, how can I help you and serve you better? And that's what she did for me. The fact that she's stretched out, and when I say stress, not stress but stretch, the word stretch, because she not only was our social worker, but she had 4 other facilities that was counting on her. And let's just talk about it, the truthful. If you're a good social worker, they're going to pull on you left to right. And when I really needed her a couple of times, of course she was not there. That's what I would like to see more, was the opportunity to really engage and connect. Not that I think I'm one in a million, but at the same time, knowing that she was more gone because she had 4 other facilities, that's not on her. That's on the full administration and whoever else in DaVita, Fresenius, or whatever services you want to call them. They stretch our social workers so thin, instead of being there at the clinic where we need them at, they're trying to service an unsurmountable crazy number. But she's just awesome. She's dynamite, and I love it. So.
All right. John, what about you? Did your social worker do well in this process, or what would you have liked to see more from your social worker?
So I feel like I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage for this particular question, because it was actually truly my nephrologist that facilitated the entire process for me. If I had any recommendations for social workers, I would say, and it's not easy because it's exactly as Della stated, they are stretched thin, really stretched thin. 3 facilities, 3 shifts per facility, sometimes 4 shifts per facility, 36 chairs, 36 people per, I mean, it's crazy. But if a social worker ever has the opportunity to visit each hospital in their area, each transplant center in their area, and actually go through the evaluation process that a patient goes through to better understand what that facility is going to require in their particular area, I think would be of tremendous benefit. Because, for instance, I live in an area where there are 3 primary transplant facilities, but there are nuances to each of those facilities that you have to navigate. And if a patient comes to you and you actually have just a general perspective, it could cause frustration and concern. And I'll just give you one example. There are some centers that will require you to have a certain BMI. Others don't. There will be some centers that require for you to go through a mental evaluation. Others don't. And that could factor heavily in a patient deciding exactly how to proceed, where to proceed, and what to do. But it's what I would advise a social worker. But again, finding the time to do something like that, I mean, God bless them. I mean, that's me. Yeah, God bless them.
All right. And Mike?
Myself and my donor had the opportunity to be part of a panel with some social workers in Kansas City here a few years ago. It was a tremendous blessing. I saw the care and the skill. The questions they asked us were very insightful. Having said that, I had a really negative experience, and I think Della and John both hit the nail on the head. There was no follow through in my situation, but I assume that the social worker was so stretched out that they just didn't have the opportunity to get back to me. So I think we're all three saying something very similar.
All right. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Mike, Della, John, for providing your perspective on the transplant process. I'm sure you've helped a lot of folks out there, both patients and professionals. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you. It's a privilege. I appreciate it.
Same here.
Jerome, I know it was a patient or someone had made a comment in the chat about the immunosuppressive bill. I know, and I think, Mike, you said it. If you guys go on to, even on our website, NCC or National Kidney Foundation or any of those will have the relative information, and it breaks it down very good in detail. So about that bill.
Thank you, Della. Thank you for that. All right. Next slide, Matt. So I want to tell you about some resources on transplant. The Transplant 101 series was developed by the NPFE-LAN Transplant Affinity Group this year. There are 7 handouts on what patients can expect before and after transplant. So the handouts cover what is a kidney transplant, the types of kidney donors, what is a transplant center, kidney transplant surgery, post-transplant kidney diet, the kidney transplant costs that are associated with transplant, and the transplant team members. There's also a video on YouTube that accompanies this written resource or this printed resource. To download the Transplant 101 series, visit the ESRD NCC.org website and select patients. Next slide. So we also want to tell you about the telemedicine patient toolkit. Due to COVID, a lot of folks are using telemedicine to connect with their healthcare team. So this toolkit has information about what telemedicine is, the benefits of telemedicine, how kidney patients may use telemedicine, what are some other issues I can use telemedicine for, the kind of technology you will need in order to do telemedicine, and tips on how to prepare for your telemedicine visit. To get your copy of this patient toolkit, just visit kidneycovidinfocenter.com. Next slide. So yeah, we're going to thank you all for joining us for this transplant session. Our next session, Be the Captain of Your Healthcare, starts in about 6 minutes. We have 2 excellent patients that will be sharing their kidney journey with you. So stand by. We'll get that session started in about 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, Della, if you're still on. You did a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you, Della.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jerome.
Yeah, thank you, John. You were awesome. You're very articulate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.